Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, fueling philanthropic programs and dedicated to creating educational and professional opportunities for Alaska Native people.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with the Alaska Weather Show. As always, you can call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391. Get updates to the forecast, check out any watches, warnings, advisories that we have out for the state. We also have our website at weather.gov/Alaska. Get any updates there as well, and you can follow us on Facebook or Twitter. Taking a look now at the warnings throughout the state, you can see pretty colorful. We have activity going on throughout almost all of mainland Alaska, with the exception of a few of the southern places and some places along the north and eastern parts of the Arctic coastline. So we'll kind of start chronologically. We are going to have impacts first beginning in southwest Alaska out over the YK Delta area. That's going to primarily be for snow and blowing snow, a little bit lighter here for the Kuskokwim Delta into the lower Kuskokwim Valley, which is why we have the winter storm warnings a little bit further to the north, with winter weather advisories further to the south. Now, these are going to start sometime this late evening into tonight, depending on which area, and those are going to progressively move throughout the state, beginning later over nighttime hours and then into early Friday morning for some of the far eastern ones. They're going to also start to end with these earlier ones later on Friday, and that's going to continue to progress out over the east as well. Primarily, all of these are for snow and blowing snow with blizzard-like conditions from areas from Ambler through Galena and out further towards the west, with a little bit lighter, but still we're going to see some blowing snow conditions out there, dropping visibilities down to a half mile or less at times. Not quite as bad as the blizzard conditions out west, but still pretty bad for areas out to the east, and a lot of snow for all the locations that you see there in red for much of the central and eastern interior, up through the Brooks Range and out towards the west coast. Now, we also have, in addition to all of these warnings, out over the Norton Sound area, we have coastal flood watch in effect. That is for late Thursday through Saturday morning, with the highest impacts on the south side of the Seward Peninsula. And there is going to be a long extended period of southwesterly fetch that's going to turn to become more westerly, and that's going to bring the potential for some of that shore-fast ice along the coast to break up and even be pushed onshore. Again, we have quite a bit of activity with a big system coming in from the Bering Sea that's going to bring a lot of winter weather to the area, and even some freezing rain conditions are going to come in after those areas of snow and blowing snow to areas of southwest Alaska, primarily from Galena and Nome further to the south. So with all that, we do want to suggest again visiting our website for specific details on the area that you happen to be in. Again, that is weather.gov/Alaska, or you can call our weather info line and get all this information for the specific site that you are in. In addition to all of those, we also have a high wind warning out for the central Aleutians that is valid now until 10 p.m. tonight. Taking a look at our satellite imagery to see what's causing all of these problems. We have our main system out here to the west with our low pressure system way out in the western part of the Bering, but you can see our front draping in with the cold front going just by the central Aleutian Islands there. As we watch again, we'll watch the warm front pushing through the Bering Sea, making it closer towards southwest part of the state, with some of the cloud cover already making it over southwest Alaska, with snow soon to follow. As we look out over mainland Alaska, not as much in terms of high cloud cover, but you can see a lot of the lower clouds that are still bringing in some lighter snow throughout much of mainland Alaska. And then down in the Panhandle area, we do have some clouds lingering in there as well, with some light showers. A mix of rain and snow there, with more rain by the Gulf, but as we get further away from the Gulf, a little bit more snow, and at higher elevations, more snow as well. So as we look down in for the remainder of today, we do have some lighter rain and snow again, and mostly rain as we get closer towards the Gulf. As we move away from the Gulf, more snow mixed in. Then throughout much of the mainland part of the state to include the south central. We have some lighter showers lingering out throughout the afternoon and evening hours, but you can see off to the west our big system coming up with the main low way out over the western Bering Sea, but a long fetch of warm air transitioning over a lot of the snow to rain throughout the central Aleutian Islands, throughout much of the Bering Sea as well, with that leading edge bringing in some snow. We are going to see higher amounts of snow falling, especially as we move into the tonight period. As that pushes into southwest Alaska, the leading edge will bring snow and heavy snow with it. And out ahead of that, we do have the stronger winds, which is why we're going to see a lot of blowing snow conditions with this system as well. Right behind that, things are warming up with that really strong push of warm air overrunning those colder surface temperatures, which is why we are going to see an area of freezing rain come in. It shouldn't last particularly too long at any given location, but it is going to be moving steadily through southwest Alaska. And then behind that, we're going to have things transition over to rain, which can still make for interesting driving conditions with that rain falling over the fresh snow and ice. And then we have some fog over the Alaska Peninsula, and behind this system we are going to get colder again and transition things back over to snow. Out over mainland Alaska ahead of the system, we have high pressure, a weak high pressure lingering there with some isolated snow showers out to the east. And then out over the northern parts of the Panhandle, we do have a mixture of rain and snow. Again, as we get further away from the Gulf, we are going to see more snow. For Thursday, lingering snow showers up by the Haines and Skagway area, but down in the very southern part of the Panhandle, we are going to see a mixture of rain and snow. Now for mainland Alaska, quite a lot going on throughout the day on Thursday. And remember, this is a static image, but this system will be progressing, pushing these areas of snow throughout the state towards the northeast throughout the day tomorrow, including these areas of freezing rain and rain. Those are going to also progress. Not much of the freezing rain will make it past southwest Alaska or north of Galena. So we are expecting that to start to stall out, but the snow and blowing snow conditions are going to continue to push more to the north and east throughout the day. And that's throughout anywhere north of the Alaska Range, throughout the central interior, out towards the Seward Peninsula and up towards the Barrow area. South Central will see some snow, but shouldn't see a lot in terms of blowing snow. And then behind this frontal system, we are going to have colder air coming back in, transitioning the rain showers back over to snow showers. Then on Friday, things finally starting to calm down a little bit in terms of the winter weather advisories, the winter storm warnings. We do have a new system coming out towards the western Aleutian Islands, bringing up another small push of warm air, turning over some of that snow to rain out over mainland Alaska. The low that was over the area is actually dissipated. This is a new low that's coming in from the west that's bringing more snow throughout much of interior Alaska, with the strongest impact out over the Seward Peninsula area. Some snow along the Arctic coastline as well in some areas throughout some of south central, but primarily towards the Alaska Range and further out towards the Wrangell St. Elias. Then as we look out over the Panhandle, a new little low coming in that area, bringing in some warmer air with it, transitioning over some of the snow they're seeing in places up towards the Skagway area and seeing rain more by the Sitka area. Temperatures for today as of this afternoon at 2 p.m. primarily in the mid-30s throughout the Panhandle area. Sitka seeing a little bit warmer air, 43 degrees there. So look out over south central Alaska, North Gulf Coast seeing temps in the 30, but as we get a little bit further inland, we're seeing temperatures a little bit colder in the 20s, with Gulkana down at 6 degrees this afternoon. Single digits for the most part in the interior, dropping down below zero as we get further to the north, and then all below zero along the Arctic coastline except for Barrow at 1 degree. And then Kaktovik being the coldest there at minus 23. Down along the west coast of the state, negative temperatures for the most part along the west coast by the Seward Peninsula area, Kotzebue Sound. As we get further to the west and south, we are going to see a little bit warmer temperatures as we're starting to see the effects of that warm southerly flow. In the teens for the most part in the YK Delta area and down into areas around Bristol Bay, but we can see the quick transition over to temperatures in the near or in the 40s as we have that strong push of warm air coming up from the south with ADAC all the way up at 48 degrees this afternoon already. As we look over low temperatures tonight, dropping down into the mid-30s for many of the Aleutian Islands, but we can see some of that warmer air staying along the coastline of the YK Delta and Bristol Bay areas, staying well above freezing, up in the teens and in some cases in the 20s. As we look up along the Arctic coastline, we do have temperatures well below zero, getting down to minus 26 degrees for the Dead Horse area. In the interior, all below zero as well. Much of the south central until you get down closer to the Kenai Peninsula and North Gulf Coast, where we are going to see temperatures in the single digits to teens for the most part. And then down in the Panhandle area, upper 20s to lower 30s expected lows for tonight. Looking into tomorrow's highs, mid-30s for the most part for the Panhandle, up around 20 degrees for much of the south central area. And the big thing to note for this whole mainland Alaska area is you can start to see those stronger temps following that warm front. We do have temperatures above freezing into the mid-30s for much of southwest Alaska, right around freezing for areas in the southern part of the Seward Peninsula. But then as we get further inland, in places where the warm front will not get to tomorrow, we do have temperatures staying below zero for highs tomorrow, including areas around Fort Yukon, Arctic Village, and all along the Arctic coastline from Barrow to the east. Then in the Bering Sea for highs tomorrow, we're going to get up to around 40 behind that strong push of warm air from the south. For our flying weather now, we are going to have a lot of lower ceilings and visibilities with all that snow and rain coming up with that system that we have. So all along the Arctic coast, or the west coast of the state, from the Seward Peninsula further to the south, including much of the Bering and central Aleutian Islands, going to see some MVFR with IFR conditions mixed in. Along the Arctic coastline, MVFR and IFR, and then some areas right around the northern parts of the Panhandle through the Yakutat area. Afternoon, going to still see in the Panhandle quite a bit of MVFR and IFR conditions, and then as our frontal system pushes further inland, those MVFR and IFR conditions are going to spread further to the north and east with it. So for the passes, Anaktuvuk Pass should be VFR dropping down to MVFR tomorrow, as well as Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill will start off in VFR, drop all the way down to IFR tomorrow. Rainy Pass will be similar. Windy Pass will start off VFR, drop down to IFR tomorrow. Isabel will start off VFR, only drop down to marginal conditions. Ventasta Pass also VFR to MVFR tomorrow. Tanita VFR all the way down to IFR. And Portage VFR all the way down to IFR as well, with Chilkoot and White remaining IFR throughout the day. So we can see some of our warmer air coming up with our freezing lines moving up towards the northern parts of the Gulf, with our surface freezing line coming all the way up towards the Seward Peninsula as that warmer air comes in tomorrow. For our icing, it's going to kind of follow our frontal system. We do have above 3,000 feet for the central Aleutian Islands, coming up towards the Yukon Delta area, above 8,000 feet there, between 5,000 and 10,000 feet up towards the Kotzebue Sound area, moving out over the central parts of the interior to the Alaska Range, above 5,000 feet there, and below 5,000 feet for the very northern parts of the Panhandle. For our jet stream, what we really want to focus on here is this strong push 170 knot jet that's bringing up a lot of that warm air and really supporting that system as it's pushing further to the north. And then we have the northerly flow of the jet coming in the eastern part of the state at 145 knots. 9,000 feet winds, we do have a westerly flow over the Bering, pretty strong here, 50 knots, getting up as high as 70 knots near the low center. But our strongest winds are pushing behind that warm front, 85 knots coming in from the southwesterly direction, then moving over the state, dropping down pretty quickly over the central part of the state to 30 to 35 knots, but 60 to 70 knots out of the southwest as we get over the southwestern part of the state. Then out over the Panhandle, a lot weaker flow, 15 to 25 knots out of a westerly direction. 3,000 foot winds, we do have about 5 knots over the northern parts of the Panhandle, so pretty light there, but as we get out over the western part of the state, you can see that stronger core of winds again, 75 knots out of a southwesterly direction right along the western part of the state, dropping down to 60 and then 55 knots, and this is at 3,000 feet, so we're going to expect some turbulence with these strong winds as well. And then as we look out further to the west, we have westerly flow, 45 to 55 knots, getting all the way up to 70 as we get closer to the low center. For turbulence, as expected with all these stronger winds, a lot of turbulence, even with some areas of isolated severe turbulence here. So from Kiska towards Attu, we are going to see below 4,000 feet the potential for some isolated severe. For the central Aleutians from Atka through Akutan area, below 4,000 feet expected, some isolated severe for tomorrow. And then anywhere from the Yukon Delta area up through Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula area, there is the potential for some isolated severe turbulence below 5,000 feet for tomorrow. And if you stay with us, we'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Thoman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often we don't, at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook, and on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Thoman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back. We'll first take a quick look at the ice edge coming all the way down through, filling in at the Chukchi Sea area, filling in north of St. Lawrence Island. But as we see the warmer air come up from the south over the next day or so, we are going to see some of this diminishing a little bit. Shouldn't go all the way away or anything, but we are going to see diminishment up through the Chukchi Sea area. And we do have some ice out over the northern parts of Cook Inlet as well, and extending down into the Bristol Bay area. Starting off with our Marines in the southeastern part of the state, primarily a west to northwest flow, 15 to 20 knots out over the Gulf. Variable flows southeast for northern locations in the inside waters, 15 knots there, northwest 20 as we go a little bit further to the south. Then on Friday we have flow out over the Gulf out of a westerly direction, getting a little bit gustier there as we get north of Sitka, and then southerly or southeasterly flow in the inside waters, 15 to 20 knots, and as we get further to the north it's going to get gustier as well. For south central part of the state, weaker winds up north, only around 10 knots there, picking up and becoming more southerly as we get closer to Kodiak Island, 20 to 25 knots there with seas 6 to 8 feet out over the Gulf. On Friday, things are going to pick up throughout the south central areas, and that's going to be more of a westerly flow now, 20 to 35 knots through the Cook Inlet and Shalikoff Strait corridor. But as we get out in the Gulf, we are going to see winds up to as high as 45 knots with seas up to as high as 14 feet in the Gulf. Then out over the Alaska Peninsula, south to southwest flow, 30 to 40 knots, strongest further to the west with seas as high as 20 feet, and that is on the Bering side of near Cold Bay area. Then on Friday, flow starting to diminish a little bit here, 20 to 25 knots, becoming northwesterly on the Pacific side, staying more westerly or southwesterly on the Bering side. For the Aleutian Islands, pretty strong winds, 30 to 45 knots throughout much of the corridor, a west or southwest direction for the most part, with seas strongest on the Pacific side up to as high as 30 feet, and out over the western Aleutian Islands, still that similar southwest flow up to as high as 45 knots there. Then on Friday, switching and becoming more southeasterly, 40 to 45 knots out west, becoming more southerly for areas of the central Aleutians to the east, 20 to 30 knots there. Along the west coast of the state, southerly flow 40 to 45 knots, with seas as high as 32 feet and freezing spray as we get closer towards the Bering Strait area. Then on Friday, southwesterly flow getting up to as high as 55 knots now west of St. Matthew Island. And then we have seas getting up to as high as 38 feet, highest in that same area. On Thursday for the North Slope area, we have easterly flow getting up to as high as 50 knots. And then we have way out east, we have westerly flow near Kaktovik in the Beaufort Sea, around 20 knots there. As we move into Friday, a few more places with that westerly flow, 15 to 20 knots, and then southerly flow as we get along the western coast, as high as 45 knots as we get closer towards the Kotzebue Sound area on Friday. Quick recap of our weather for tonight. We have our main system out over the Bering Sea, pushing a warm front in out over the mainland part of the state, starting in the southwest, and that's going to trigger a lot of warnings and advisories throughout the state, again, starting in the southwest part of the state. First leading in with heavy snow, and that's going to mix in with some stronger winds as we get further to the north, bringing in some blowing snow and even blizzard conditions for places around the Seward Peninsula. As that system pushes further inland, it's going to spread that snow further inland, but it's also going to bring up some warmer air that's going to turn some of the snow over to freezing rain, and then that's going to continue to warm and turn to all rain for areas right along the coastline. So we are going to watch this system progress throughout the state as we move into tomorrow, and that's going to bring a lot of warnings and advisories throughout much of mainland Alaska, all the way to the west coast and down to the southwest part of the state. Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Support comes from the University of Alaska College Savings Plan, helping you and your child save for college every step of the way, from diapers to diploma. More information at uacollegesavings.com.